Okay, so this tutorial is going to be about squash and stretch on our kind of simplified Boxee rig that we set up in class. Just a few little comments. I have switched this to the Animate tab. We have Timeline over here, but the Layers palette is also docked over here. And I've hid the little circle icon that we created, the Boxee sub D in the body itself. So I'm just not going to be using those for now. I just want to focus on these little three little pieces, right? So we're going to animate a little squash and stretch so that the character builds up some energy and jumps off the ground just a little bit and comes back down and does a little bit of bounce to kind of catch itself, right? A little reverb, as it were. So the other thing I wanted to mention in your character, and actually this is something I just learned. In fact, I think I probably have to go back and change the Boxee rig, the kind of full one that we have with the eyeball and everything that I created for you all, is a Cinema 4D. Actually, their order of operations works up here down through the list. So you might be like, what does that mean? So let's go to the squash and stretch. And if I turn that on, and then I do go to the bend, you can see that it's kind of bending along that stretch. That seems to be what we would want, right? As the character might kind of, if it was all stretched out, wiggle backwards and forwards that way. So what happens if we switch this and we make the bend first and the squash second in the list? So let's go back to the bend. And you can see that the bend is happening outside of the squash and stretch. I guess it's happening here, and then the squash and stretch, because the object kind of falls outside of the boundaries of that, we don't get the correct deformation. So the moral of the story is sometimes you need to play with the deformations based on their order so that they work the way that you want. And in this case, we want the squash and stretch to be first, right? So let's just put that back to 0. And let's put the bend back to 0. Okay, so the whole idea here is I want the box to kind of compress a little bit. And I'll call this the trampoline method, right? Where the character is going to build up some energy and then pop off the ground and come down and kind of settle a little bit. Right? Very simple. We're going to do more complicated things with this later on, like a kind of jumping walk cycle that I think is going to look really cool. We'll have all the students do a march of the Boxees, I think, as I called it in class. So, but first important part is just to get used to how this process works. So I'm just going to start keyframing. Sometimes when I'm experimenting with how a kind of phenomenon works in animation, I think it's sometimes good to just put keyframes down and start moving them within the dope sheet so you get a sense of that timing. Obviously, if you know exactly what you're doing and you storyboarded all this out, it'd be good to maybe do some reference video or talk your way through the timing, but I'm just going to go at it from the beginning. So I've got my little squash and stretch. I'm going to keyframe that, and the bend, I'm going to keyframe that right at the beginning. And also, I'm going to make this, why did I have 300? Let's go to 150. I also made sure to set 24 frames per second for my project right before I started keyframing. Okay, let's go back to this, the squash and stretch. So maybe at frame 10, I'm going to keyframe the same thing. So I want it to kind of pause for a second. And let's have it, I don't know, after 8 frames, squash down just a little bit, maybe not too much. I don't know. And we'll keyframe that, and then let's have it actually stretch up just a little bit past, and we'll keyframe that. Oops, and we'll put this one down a little bit, right? And we'll keyframe that. And back up. And back down. All right, so let's see what we got. This is going to be really horrible, right? So let's just play it. Not bad, right? I've just spaced these out. Better yet, still in my layers view. Let's look at the timeline. And if you don't see something in the timeline, so the squash and stretch didn't automatically load over here, I can right-click and go down and say show tracks. So that will load this thing into the timeline. I think I can actually drag and drop things in here as well. Right, so there's I haven't used the bend yet, but I just put it in here. So we can see how this is happening. Oops. And the way I like to look at something that has this kind of oscillating behavior, right, is to look at the graph editor. So something slowly working through here. There's kind of a deep rhythm. I might get to the point where I start to space these out just a little bit. Maybe these are a little quicker. So maybe right before it gets going. See how I create just a little tiny waggle in there? Like it starts to, let's pull that down here. It's almost like it's breathing, right? Comes up, comes up and down, up. And we might want to do some things where so what I'm doing is selecting a keyframe here. I'm going to copy and paste. So I can just maybe hold it up there just a little bit longer. And where's that little auto smooth? Where's that one? There we go. So there's a little auto weighting that you can set up and use if you want. Oops, I have both of them selected. Right, the whole idea is maybe getting it to plateau a little bit here. And then here I want to kind of hold it. So copy and paste. And again, what I might do is just move that down just a little bit. Right, see how it's like it's flexing, right? It's just holding that position. So if I'm going to jump at this point, I want this to happen very quickly. So maybe I'll go grab that key from there. Copy and paste that over there. So I really like the copy and paste keyframe setup in Cinema 4D with that. So you can see how it quickly moves through here. So I guess the next part is I need it to jump, right? So this is going to be the last frame that's going to be on the ground. Let's play. Okay. And you know, I can see that this one's too. Here we go. And I'm going to stall this one out a little bit more. Okay. Right, just editing as I go, trying to get a sense of how so I'm going to make that one a little bit. And actually, I think a lot of this can come over this way. Right, I'm going to just maybe hold it that way. Maybe that's the way to do this one a little bit. Let's just take this one over. Let me turn off the auto. Wait, let's just stretch it. Okay, and all right, so I'm going to call that good. I can come back and tweak it if I need to, conscious of time here. So this, the last frame that I want it to be on the ground is here. I don't want it to be stretched all the way out and still on the ground. I want it to have force, right, when it comes off of there. And maybe I'll, move these one frame one way, one frame the other. But let's go back to the to Boxee control and its coordinates, and let's just keyframe the Y. In fact, I'll keyframe all three of them just in case I want to use that later. All right, so it's going to come off the ground. Let's go ahead and just put a keyframe here. Okay, so let's see what we get here. Right. So it kind of works, right? But it has one serious flaw. So let me take this in here, look as well. Let's look at this position Y. I'm hitting H on the keyboard to frame what is for the whole entire curve, and I can also select those and hit S to frame on selected if I need to. Okay, so my problem here is that the old Boxee here is coming off the ground kind of slow, right? It's like slowly, and then it gets its act together, right? And it comes all the way up here. So what we need to do is break this tangent. So if I just grab on this, it will, these will be linked together, these kind of locked tangents. I think the hotkey there is, if I hold down Shift, it will just break these for me. And really what I want is for this to, and I'll take this one too, stretch it out. And of course I haven't done the landing part. Maybe I should just do that. Let's go about right there. Copy, paste, right? I'm just gonna paste a frame. Oops. Keep doing that. There we go. All right, so let's see what we got. All right, so it's building up some energy. Pops off the ground pretty quickly. It's just a small little jump, right? That's fine. But you can see this has to happen, right? Nothing leaves the ground, starts to levitate off the surface, right? So whenever you're doing these jumps, you have to. You absolutely have to break the tangent. The other rule of thumb I give here is, so let's consider this the underside, right? This would be the under part of the curve, and this would be the over part of the curve, like everything above this. So when you're using this tangent handle, you don't want it to be the little handle for it below the curve, because anything mathematically that's below the curve is slowing down the speed, right, the motion itself. So we always want to make sure that it's above the curve. I guess it could be maybe parallel, running directly along it, but it either runs straight through it so it has a constant speed, or in this case we want it to just come off quickly and do this. Right, so it felt like it jumped. Obviously, it's still stretched out, so we need to animate that, fix that little part here. But so maybe when it stretches, I don't want it to stretch for too long. Let's look at where the factor H. Let's pull this together so it comes up, stretches to this point, and then I would say maybe a couple frames later. Click on that, and I'll just make it back to 100. Right, it's going to retain. Let's do a little camera move here. Okay, so it'll kind of retain that shape. And now here's the tricky part. When it hits the ground, obviously, as soon as as it hits the ground, the very next frame it needs to collapse. So let's, for now, this is actually incorrect, but I'm going to put a keyframe here, and then the next couple frames I'm going to compress it, right? So that's like catching itself. Right? So that shouldn't happen until it runs into something. And this can happen much faster. Again, just like it was jumping, we left the ground very quickly. Let's do S to frame these selected keyframes. But again, when it hits the ground, it shouldn't slowly start to compress. It should probably, oops, if I select that, again, holding down the shift key, that should probably happen pretty quick, right? And then it starts to slow down, right, as the body like compresses whatever little bones are in our poor little Boxee or muscles or whatever, try to slow that down. And then we would get into the same kind of situation where we would, let's just do copy and paste, right? And copy and paste. Copy and paste. And I'm just looking at this as just kind of like a mathematical little sine curve. Oops. So when I copy the frame here, I just do Command C, and then I need to make sure that I've moved to a new point in time, and paste that there. And I can just, in the little value for that key, I can say 100%. Maybe move that back just a little. I would probably do a couple more wiggles in it, but that's pretty good, right? You can see it kind of stops pretty quick. Copy. So maybe that one's down a little bit, over a little bit, and that one's our 100 value right there. Those are pretty quick. That's like one frame. I'm kind of in between there. Maybe it gives a little wiggle though. That'd be nice. You can see it's too fast, right? So select all those, and if I go to back to my dope sheet here with those selected, I can just stretch those out a little bit, right? So it will scale the keyframes themselves. Yeah, that's pretty good. Let's do this one. Oops. Move that one over, that one over. Not perfect, but that's better. It was too fast, that timing before. Okay. So I would definitely do some tweaks there at the end, but one thing, this is where it's kind of like some style points here, right? So you can see we keyframed it so that it compressed back and held its shape. See how fast it's falling to? That's great, right? It's holding and then it comes down quickly and it catches itself. But one thing we can do at this point is, and if you read different textbooks on this is some people use this trick. You won't see this in every example. But if I go back here, I'm going to, let's see, where was I? Let's go back into the factor. So what I'm going to do is move this one frame back. So I'm holding it at that. In fact, I can move it a couple frames. And right here, right before it starts to compress, right, because it's hitting the ground, I guess it's right there. What I'm going to do is, just as it starts to touch, I am going to stretch it out. And this is not kind of physically accurate, but it's going to give, here we go. Position that one that way. So what we're trying to do, make it visually snappy, right? And because I stretch it out for one frame, it just makes this feel snappier. In fact, I'm going to move this one just one frame over, right? So it is retaining its shape, and then it stretches. It's kind of like stretching your legs out, like before you land after a big jump, right? And it will catch itself. And again, this little thing here at the end maybe is not working as much as I would like it to, but no, it's too big. get some little settling. All right, 20 minutes. It's quite the little tutorial watching some animating. Let's recap here. So we've modified some of the tangents to get things to kind of stall, like so that they wait a little bit. There's some anticipation. And most importantly, we broke the tangent so that when the Boxee actually goes up in the Y direction, and when it lands, it happens quickly. It doesn't want to ease into landing on the ground. It's falling. So it should hit pretty hard. And then we're using these secondary overlapping motions to show, and squash and stretch, right? To show that there's a force has been applied to an object. So we get the sense that gravity is involved and that there's weight and that there's mass and physicality to it. So this is just one little jump. The nice thing about this, and this is, there's lots of little things. We didn't even animate the bend, right? So we could use the bend coming into play, like maybe the character. Let's go to bend. Starts to lean forward. And where is that H? And we'd hold it there. Right, so we use the bend a little bit for it to show that it's trying to jump a little bit. All right, again, keep in mind when we look at these, part of it is just practice, but you get to the point that the animation feels right. Sometimes you just don't see every frame, but you feel all the little things that are going on with this. Practice this, make sure that you get this right, because the reality is this could be a walk cycle. And so I could take this character and loop this animation and attach it to a curve that would have its own looping animation, and we could see this character hopping across our stage with really only basically putting one step in place, right? And we would just loop that behavior as we go through. So forces, squash and stretch, breaking tangents, make sure that it feels right. Ask yourself, is there a reason for this to compress? Is the character making itself compress so that it can jump? Is the character compressing, squashing, and stretching because it has run into the floor? If it hasn't hit the floor yet and it starts to compress, it's going to look weird. All right, cause and effect. Have fun animating.